he was referring to the comments that Yevgeny Prigozhin made last week when he publicly, or last week or over the weekend, when he publicly was celebrating the events in Niger, and the fact that we certainly see Wagner take advantage of this type of situation whenever it occurs in Africa. We, as I've stated before, did not see any role by Wagner in the instigation of this attempted takeover, and we have not seen any Wagner military presence as of yet in Niger. I don't have any specific Wagner activities that I can make public at this point, but we saw Yevgeny Prigozhin publicly celebrating what's happened, and as I said, it did seem a very odd event that we had a bunch of Russian flags show up at so-called protests in support of the junta leaders.
Sure. Could I just, unless you want to follow up on this?
So it's only the mysterious flag purchases that's the evidence that you're citing for.
I'm not citing any of it other than what I just said, which is I think it's very strange that if your country is taken over by a military junta and you want to show your support, the way you decide to do that is by running out and buying at, I guess, a store locally, a Russian flag. That seems like an odd choice.
To follow on to that, some of the reporting from Niger, not to say that the innuendo that you're implying is, it may be correct, but it's also possible that, based on some of the reporting, that there are some people in Niger who are leaning towards Russia because there's a historic dislike of France, particularly, and the US is grouped in with France. So I wondered, rather than this sort of suggestion that maybe the flags were bought by Russians or whatever it is there some concern that there could be actually legitimate or genuine feeling in the country of we would rather be aligned with the Russians because we've had a pretty bad experience with Western powers in the past?
Look, it is certainly a big country with a diversity of views. So I am not going to in any way try to stand here and speak for every citizen of that country. I will tell you that we, in our conversations with leaders of civil society and NGOs, including the conversations that Acting Deputy Secretary Nuland had yesterday, so we have heard support for a return to the constitutional order. And remember, it is the people of Niger themselves that elected that chose a democratically elected president that has now been placed under house arrest as a result of this junta. So I will say that and then add on top of it, as we've said before, look, anytime you see instability, or I shouldn't say anytime, but as we've seen before during instability in African countries, you have certainly seen Wagner try to take advantage of that. And even in the last few weeks, you've seen Yevgeny Prigozhin making public remarks trying to do the same thing here.
And just, sorry, one other thing. You mentioned that you still have some hope that things can be reversed. Is there, what's that hope based on? Is there any, from the Deputy Secretary's trip, is there any anything you can point to as like this gave us hope? She didn't even get a meeting with the junta leader. So.
Look, we do still have hope, but we were also very realistic. And you heard her say yesterday that the conversations she had were very difficult. As I said in my first comments, we are realistic about the situation on the ground. We do have hope that the situation will be reversed, but at the same time, we are making clear, including in direct conversations with the junta leaders themselves, what the consequences are of failing to return to constitutional order.
Just follow up on Niger. We've discussed, of course, last week a lot about the civilians, American citizens leaving. Can you talk about the status of U.S. soldiers? I know it's obviously a Pentagon issue, but in terms of U.S. troops there, is there any move to withdraw them to relocate it?
I will defer all comment on that to the Pentagon. I just don't think it's appropriate for me to get into it from here. Others on Niger? Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Deputy Secretary Nolan said that he was under virtual house arrest. She was not allowed to speak with him, that might see him. Do you know, has anyone been able to contact President Bazoum?
Yes, we've had a number of conversations with him, including yesterday. It's possible people have had conversations with him today that I'm not aware of them, but I know we had conversations with him by phone as recently as yesterday.
Okay, so what kind of content do these conversations have? I mean, what do they talk about when they speak with the president who's under house arrest?
Sure.
What they say, the cavalry on its way, or
So I will speak to the conversations the secretary's had with President Bazoum, and in those conversations, the secretary has, number one, looked for an assessment of the situation from President Bazoum. Number two, he's been checking on his safety and his health and the health and safety of his family. And number three, he has been assuring him that we support the return to the constitutional order, and that is the position of the United States, and that is what we are trying to work towards. All right, I promise.
Is the U.S. still in a position of not calling what's happening in Niger a coup?
It is at this point an attempted military takeover, but again, we are still working to achieve a different outcome, and we are hoping to see President Bazoum released from house arrest and able to resume his duties.
And what are your expectations from the emergency summit of West African leaders to be held on this Thursday?
So I wouldn't want to speak to that in advance of it happening. Obviously, we've been in touch with leaders of the members of ECOWAS, and will continue to be in touch with them as we try to resolve this situation. We have been fully supportive of their efforts to resolve it.
On this, Matt, will
Yeah.
the U.S. attend this meeting on Thursday?
Well, we're not a member of ECOWAS, obviously, so we wouldn't be. So we would. Hold on, let me finish. We're not attending as a. We're not a member state. Whether we have someone attending as an observer, I don't know. Yeah. Stay on this topic. Yeah. Go.
I just want to circle back to the coup question. What glimmer of hope are you holding on to if, based off of Deputy Acting Secretary of State's trip, there was little movement? I mean, we're almost 2 weeks in. He's still under house arrest. He's not in control. What sliver?
That we remain in conversations with partners in the region, with civil society leaders, with leaders of NGO groups, and we believe that the people of Niger who elected President Bazoum support a return to the constitutional order. So that is the policy we will continue to press and try to achieve. But I recognize that this is a difficult situation, and the outcome here is uncertain. But we are not ready to throw up our hands and go home and stop trying to achieve a return to democracy and a return to the constitutional order. We are going to continue to press for that outcome because it's one we support and one we believe ultimately the people of Niger support. Yeah, Shannon.
On consequences for the U.S. and potentially other countries around the world, if in fact this attempted military takeover is not reversed, what do you think might happen if, even if the current power state stays the way it is, on collaboration with counterterrorism, given how intractable the junta seems to be?
Again, I don't want to speculate about decisions that we make down the road. Right now, we are trying to return to a constitutional order, or trying to see Niger return to a constitutional order. But we have made very clear to the leaders of the junta that there will be consequences with respect to the assistance that we provide them if they don't return to a constitutional order. What those consequences will be beyond what we've already discussed, which is the hundreds of millions of dollars of assistance that we provide them. Not ready to get into that at this point because, again, we are trying to achieve a return to democracy here. Yeah, go ahead, Kylie.
The ECOWAS angle of this, I mean, they've obviously threatened to take military action to reinstate President Bazoum, and you said that the U.S. fully supports their efforts to resolve this. So if they did take that military action, the U.S. would support it?
We are supporting a diplomatic path at this time. And I wouldn't want to speculate about other outcomes or other policy choices that we might make at some other point, but right now our focus is on a diplomatic path. That was the purpose of Acting Deputy Secretary Newland's visit yesterday, was to present a diplomatic path to them, one that they rejected. But right now we're going to continue to focus on diplomacy.
And then could we just get your response to the Nigerian military leaders rejecting ECOWAS, the African Union, and the UN mediators from trying to, have meetings in the country earlier today?
I think it's very unfortunate, and it is in keeping with the message that we heard from them yesterday when Acting Deputy Secretary Newland presented options for a diplomatic path forward and a negotiated process going forward, and they were not willing to take that path at this time. We're going to keep trying, again, fully recognizing how difficult that path is. Anything else on Niger? Is it Niger? All right.
No.
All right. Anything else on Niger before I go? All right, Janie.
Thank you. Do you have any specific information about the arrest of a Russian spy who was trying to assassinate President Zelensky?
I've seen those reports. I don't have any specific comment on them. I would obviously refer to Ukraine to talk about that in any detail. But obviously, we've seen Russian espionage and Russian intelligence activities in Ukraine for some time. That is not in any way surprising, and we fully support Ukraine's general efforts to hold people accountable for those activities.
North Korea continues to operate the vessel sanctioned by the UN Security Council, and China is providing used vessels to North Korea. What sanctions will the United States impose on countries that violated sanctions?
Well, first I will say that we will fully enforce our existing sanctions, but then I will give the answer you've heard me give in the past, which is with respect to any potential future sanctions actions, I would never want to preview them from this podium.
China have 10 years, they still provide these ships, so do you have anything about this issue when Secretary Blinken meeting with the Chinese counterpart?
I don't want to comment anymore with respect to any potential sanctions actions other than what I just did. Go ahead, Alex.
May I get a reaction to Russian missile strikes last night on residential buildings in eastern Ukraine, in Pokrovsk? One of the buildings was known apparently to be used by journalists, so they're not even hiding that they're targeting non-military targets. Is this how do you think they are responding to the peace summit that happened over the weekend?
Look, I wouldn't want to draw any specific parallel because we've seen the Russians target civilian infrastructure and homes and apartment buildings and schools and hospitals going back for some time. So they do that. They have done that consistently since the beginning of the war. So I wouldn't necessarily put two and two together and say it was a response to. It was a direct response to the talks that went on about securing a just and lasting peace. But certainly I think it is a reflection, as all of their attacks on Ukraine, their continued attacks on Ukraine on civilian infrastructure and their attacks on grain facilities, are a reflection of Russia's refusal to engage in real peace negotiations.
On that point, your Russian counterpart seemed to have an issue with your statement on Russia refusing
what a surprise.
The negotiations, saying that the U.S. apparently discouraged Ukraine from negotiating. Was that the case?
No, absolutely not. Is this current or at some previous point? When did we supposedly discourage Ukraine from negotiating? I don't know, but it's not the case.
You did offer a partial answer to my obvious follow-up question on Uganda to help Ukraine. Ukraine foreign minister yesterday asked the secretary in a phone call for long-range missiles. Are you in a position to share what the secretary's response was?
I am not. I'll keep those private. I will keep those private diplomatic conversations private. But as I will say, as we've said before, we continue to supply Ukraine with artillery, with a whole host of weapons. We have other announcements coming later this week about additional assistance that we plan to provide Ukraine. And with respect to any other potential missile systems, they are or other defense systems, those are always actions that we consider, but don't have any announcements to make.
Thank you. My last question, Ukraine, Russia. Russian president is, Turkish side already announced it, is expected to be in Turkey by the end of this month. Do you take an issue with the fact that an convicted war criminal will be visiting a NATO member and will not get arrested?
So I'm not going to speak to the visit in particular, other than to say one thing that we have welcomed is the role that Turkey has played in pressing Russia to rejoin the Black Sea Grain Initiative. We think that they were productive. They were very constructive, obviously, in helping reach a deal for that initiative in the first place, and helpful in convincing Russia to continue with the initiative. The first, I don't know, 3 or 4, however many times it was. They threatened to withdraw before they ultimately did, and they continue to play a productive role. We think it's useful that they play that role. I don't have any comment on a potential visit other than we do support Turkey continuing to press Russia to re-enter that initiative because it's so important.
Did this come up during the Secretary's phone call with Turkish?
I'm not going to read out the private conversation. Said, go ahead.
Topics?
Sure.
Okay. Go to the Palestinian issue. An Israeli newspaper published an article saying that the Israelis will allow the Gaza people the benefit of the pilot program beginning next month. And my question to you, first of all, can you confirm that the Israelis will be doing that? And second, why is it, since this started back on July 21, why is it taking so long?
So I won't speak to decisions made by the Israeli government about how they are going to implement this program or when they are going to announce or the details of it, but they have assured us, when we first made this announcement, I believe it was last month, and they have assured us throughout this process that they would be making changes to the way they're implementing it to ensure that, excuse me, U.S. residents of Gaza would be able to participate in the visa waiver program. We have believed those assurances are important. We believe they're mandatory, and we look forward to them being implemented.
Thank you.
Well,
Go ahead.
Have you seen any progress towards them meeting this goal
Uh,
so far? I mean, I
they
understand
have-
that you're monitoring it and checking it out and seeing it. So, what does it look like so far?
They have not, with respect to Gaza, let me speak with respect to Gaza.
respect
Let me-
to the whole
let me-
thing.
I know, let me do it first. With respect to Gaza, they have not yet implemented the changes that they are going to make specific to Gaza because of the different security situation there. But we expect those changes to be made in the upcoming weeks. With respect to the overall compliance with the program, I just don't have an update. I'm just not personally aware. I'm sure that there are metrics that we're tracking to see. I'm not personally aware of where it stands.
Since the pilot ends, I guess, it is good through September 30th, that really leaves a small window by which to gauge or measure or use whatever methodology you might be using to make sure that the veracity of this program is actually being implemented.
So we have a set of data already from when the program started, and we'll have more data when the Gaza piece of it comes online. But I will say, as a general matter, we do continuous monitoring for all 40 visa waiver program countries, even after they have been admitted to the program, to ensure that they are all members in good standing and continue to meet program requirements.
Yeah, but the point is that Israel is not a visa waiver.
No, I'm saying I took Saeed's point. I think Saeed.
I know, but yeah, you monitor all of them. But this one, they're trying to get in.
Right.
So presumably, because they're not in yet, the monitoring is a little bit more
Yes.
intense.
My
Right.
point was, we have an intense amount of monitoring going on now. We will have data on which to make a decision. I think the point Saeed was trying to make, maybe not, maybe I jumped to another point, was that if we let them into the program on a amount of data that they're in, the point I was making is there is a monitoring period that is going on now. Should they be allowed to enter into the visa waiver program, there would be monitoring that goes on after that in the same way that happens for all other 40 members of the
The point
program.
is that right now, at this moment in time, on August 8th, they do not meet the requirements.
So with respect to the Gaza piece, they do
No,
not.
with respect to any of it.
So I'm just not personally tracking, as you imagine. I'm sure there's someone that has a dashboard pulled up monitoring. That's not me. So
Well, it's not me either. That's why I'm asking you. Because
Yeah,
you presumably are the people who are paying attention to this, even DHS, right?
there
But
are.
they, as of today, they do not yet meet the requirements.
They have not. So they have not done the Gaza piece yet. So the Gaza piece is an important part of meeting the requirements. With respect to the other requirements, I just don't know. But I would gather that there is an assessment period. There is an assessment that is ongoing about the data that we're collecting, and that at the end of this process, we'll be able to make a determination after having looked at all of it.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Matt, and sorry about getting excited a little earlier. So my first question is about this, and especially for you because this journalist was talking about you, so the State Department and Matt. Sami Ibrahim from...
You sure it wasn't Matt Lee?
Yeah, it was. Who can dare to talk about Matt?
You know, it was a lot easier when there was only one man.
Yeah, I bet, and only one Ned.
So this journalist who happens to be a U.S. citizen as well, and he's a top journalist in Pakistan, and he was arrested and released, I'm sure because of your pressure. He said that Matt stands there at the State Department and he talks about Niger, and him and State Department and the Biden administration is ignoring a guy like Imran Khan, who is languishing in poor conditions in jail. So no human rights, no interference, no talk about interference in internal matters when it comes to Imran Khan's government. But with Niger, so much, talk is given. So your reaction to that, because he specifically mentioned you that,
I think I spoke to this at some length yesterday, and I don't believe that my answer is any different, which is the arrest of Imran Khan is an internal matter for Pakistan. But of course, we continue to call for the respect for democratic principles, human rights, and the rule of law in Pakistan, as we do around the world.
We don't have too many U.S. citizens, top journalists in Pakistan, so that's why specifically. Just small questions, a little bit about the history of the past, and we spoke about it last week. So Rashid Dostum, the biggest heroin dealer from Afghanistan, who is in Turkey right now living in a $1 million villa. When I published a story about him in 2005, did the State Department official in Pakistan inform you that I had published a story that he was smuggling heroin in helicopters, and then he called me and threatened me? Did your colleagues at the State Department mention that?
In 2005?
Yes, sir.
No, I was
Can you
not here.
check for
I
me
was
that
not
at
here in
least?
2005.
Can you check for-
I will look into it. Yes.
And one similar one. Same thing about Pakistani officials. Senior military officials were published in the story in the Frontier Post in Pakistan that they were involved in this trade. Can you check if your colleague at least mentioned that there's this newspaper?
Instead of checking about whether someone read a story or not, is there a question that you have about a policy or?
Does the State Department regret that all these people, and just to map my seriousness in this issue is that just last week I meet this guy in Arlington driving his beautiful Ferrari. For 20 years his son was hanging around by the Potomac River because of heroin. So this city is a human issue. Do you regret that your colleagues did not mention you that this gentleman was such a big heroin dealer, the journalist has mentioned him, and you guys did not take any action?
I think I'm lost here. I think I started with a comment about an article in 2005. It's moved to it's okay. I don't think I have any comment on it. Go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. On the Iraqi Ministry of Defense delegation, I'm not sure if they have a meeting at the State Department, but they do have a meeting at the Pentagon, and also the U.S. ambassador to Iraq is taking a part in these meetings. They are talking about the future security cooperation between Iraq and the United States. What's the point that you believe that is the right time to go beyond the fighting against ISIS, and what's the reflection of this security cooperation on your diplomatic mission in Iraq and also Iraqi Kurdistan?
You are correct that the U.S. Iraq Joint Security Cooperation Dialogue did conclude today in Washington at the Pentagon. The U.S. ambassador to Iraq was there. The talks focused on the future of the U.S.-Iraq security partnership, and both sides reaffirmed a joint commitment to the enduring defeat of ISIS. We will be making a joint statement today, reading out the meetings, and I don't think I want to comment in detail before that statement comes out, but do look for it. It will have a number of details about what was discussed in the meetings.
The State Department?
I don't know if it's a joint U.S. Iraq statement. I don't know if it's us or the Pentagon. We can obviously find out.
One more question.
Well, I think he had one more.
Was there any meeting with the civilian?
No.
And one more question about the Iraqi paramilitary groups and also the Iranian-backed groups. In your recent quarterly report to the Congress, you mentioned that even the Iraqi Prime Minister has no full control of these groups, and there's a lot of concerns among the minority groups in Nineveh Plain and also in disputed area about these paramilitary groups and also PMF. How does the U.S. viewing and dealing with these groups, and do you have any concern about the future security in the region with these groups as they are gaining more power and also they are becoming stronger in Baghdad?
So the United States supports a stable, secure, and sovereign Iraq. We believe that will advance the interests of the United States and the interests of the Iraqi people. We believe all armed groups outside of state control in Iraq should be under the command and control of the commander-in-chief of the Iraqi armed forces. And we will continue to be a partner and build the capacity of the Iraqis to this end. Go ahead, Abby.
How concerned are you about the thousands of people protesting in the streets right now, leading to the U.S. Embassy closing its doors? There are reports of gunfire outside of the embassy. And can you bring us up to date on the latest U.S. efforts to mobilize the multinational force?
Sure. So we are very concerned. We remain very concerned about the situation on the ground in Haiti. That obviously led us to take the steps we took a week before last, where we ordered the departure of non-emergency staff at the embassy. And I think that directly relates to your second question, which is the next step for this process to stand up a multinational force is for the government of Kenya to lead an assessment mission. I don't have an exact date of that mission, but I do expect that to happen in the very near future in the matter of the next few weeks. And I would defer to obviously the government of Kenya to speak more specifically about that assessment mission, but they're the ones in the lead, but we expect that to happen in the near future, and we are fully supportive of those efforts.
Are all U.S. Embassy personnel on the ground there accounted for?
They are. Kylie.
Can I go to Ukraine?
You can.
This isn't a policy question, but it's based on the CNN poll last week, where we saw for the first time the majority of Americans opposed additional congressional funding for the war in Ukraine. So I'm just wondering what the administration's response is to that, if you guys are concerned about what appears, based on this poll at least, to show that the majority of Americans are just not, fully there when it comes to the need for continued support to Ukraine.
So I think this is the first time I've been asked about a poll in my short time at the tenure, and I should probably not make it a practice to comment on specific polls, but I will note that it is always dangerous to look at any one poll because they are snapshots in time and you can see other ones. I will say that we have been heartened by the support from the American people and the support, the bipartisan support we've seen in Congress for further assistance to aid Ukraine in defending its people from Russian aggression. That support has been longstanding. It has been there since the beginning of the war, and we expect it to continue.
And do you think, though, that the administration is doing an effective job at keeping the American people's support, substantial for continued support if we're starting to see, numbers like this?
Again, I'm just not going to comment with respect to a poll, but I will say that we will continue to make the case that it is in the interest of the United States to defend Ukraine. It is in the interest of the United States to see that democracy is preserved. It is in the interest of the United States to see that Russian aggression has to be answered. And so we will continue to make that case, and I will let polls speak for themselves. I guess polls don't speak for themselves, but I will let the polls stand as they may be. But we will continue to engage with Congress, where we have seen robust bipartisan support. Yes, and you do see dissenting voices, but overall we've seen bipartisan support for continued support for Ukraine, and we will continue to push for that.
And just staying on Ukraine for 1 second, last week the department put a readout of the meetings that state, NSC, and DoD had with Ukraine regarding long-term security negotiations and agreements between the U.S. and Ukraine. Do you have any idea as to when that kind of structure for long-term support for Ukraine is actually going to come to fruition, when we'll see announcements on that? Is that something that's happening anytime soon, or are we 3 to 6 months away from that?
I don't have a date. I wouldn't want to put a time frame on it because we were in the middle of those conversations, but in the conversations that we had with our Ukrainian counterparts, we did agree to follow-up meetings. I don't have a date to announce about when those meetings will occur, but there will be follow-up conversations between the United States and Ukraine. And I should note that the conversations, the bilateral conversations between the United States and Ukraine are just one part of this process. The other members of the G7 are having their own bilateral conversations about how they can assure Ukraine's long-term security. And there are 12 other countries that signed on to that statement of support who will also have their own bilateral conversations. So put together, this is a multi-country effort to assure Ukraine's long-term security. I don't have a time frame on when we'll have next steps to announce, but it's something we're pursuing aggressively.
Do you think Ukraine will see those long-term security commitments by the end of the year?
I just wouldn't want to put a time frame on it. Before I leave you, though, I understand that it's your birthday today. Happy birthday. So I won't lead the room in song. That might embarrass especially me. I'm the one with the microphone, but happy birthday nonetheless.
Thank you.
I was going to mention.
Matt,
it.
yeah,
You
right.
got away with it.
So see, that was a preemptive strike on my point.
If the
Or
two
my
of you
stand.
want to sing together, that's
Matt,
no
you
one else
first.
has to join.
Maybe afterwards, in the off the record part.
Go ahead.
Today, the protest happening in front of the State Department for Bangladesh regarding free and fair election. Do you have any comment on that, what they're doing there? And the situation in Bangladesh is really, really bad now, but they're asking, demanding for democracy in Bangladesh. So please, what is your...
As we have made clear many times, as I have made clear many times for this podium, we support free and fair elections in Bangladesh. We've made that clear publicly. We've made that clear in conversations with the Bangladeshi government, and that will continue to be our policy. All right, you've had your hand aggressively raised for a while. Go ahead. How could I miss you?
Thank you. Jackson Richmond, Epoch Times. A few questions. One, regarding the buildup in Hormuz, is the State Department concerned about the potential for escalation in view of this new troop buildup in the region? Second, what's the latest on Robert Malley? Any update? Has it been fired? And finally, what is the State Department's reaction to China and Russia sending a naval force near Alaska?
So with respect to the Strait of Hormuz, I would refer to DOD for that question. What I'll say is that the United States, in coordination with our partners and allies, is committed to protecting the freedom of maritime navigation and the free flow of commerce. The Strait of Hormuz is a vital waterway for global markets with more than $1 trillion of seaborne trade transiting it annually, including 25% of global crude oil. With respect to Rob Malley, I don't have any updates beyond what we've said previously. And with respect to the exercises near Alaska, I don't have any comment on this. Go ahead, Goyal.
Thank you.
My question is that as far as Russia's war against Ukraine is concerned now over 500 days, and millions of people around the globe are in trouble or hurting or in many ways, including food, lack of food and security and social and all that. Also, my question that next month President Biden will be in India at G20, and many G20 leaders will be joining Prime Minister Modi in India. You think this, as far as Russia's aggression against Ukraine is concerned, will be solved, or are we hoping anything coming out of this G20 in India?
I will say that in all of our conversations with allies and partners around the world, we continue to discuss the war in Ukraine. It is always one of the top topics that comes up in all of our conversations, and I have no doubt that will be true at the G20.
And sir, sorry,
one more, yeah.
What are we doing as far as millions and millions of people are suffering as far as food is concerned because of this war, and in many other ways, mental and all that?
I'm sorry, what was?
What are we doing? What message do we have those millions and millions of people who are suffering because of this war in many ways, including food, lack of food?
So it is a matter of great concern. Obviously, we were concerned that Russia pulled out of the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which was responsible for delivering food to millions and millions of people around the world, and the fact that since they pulled out, Russia has bombed grain facilities in Ukraine, which has taken further grain off the market. We will continue to press for return to the Black Sea Grain Initiative, and I will say on behalf of the United States, we have increased our food aid around the world to try to address some of that shortfall.
Thank you, sir.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. My first question on Burma. War crimes committed by Myanmar's military, including the bombing of civilians, have become increasingly frequent and present. A team of the United Nations investigators said in a report published today. So would you share your comment about this report?
Let me take that one back.
Second, on Bangladesh, Richard Nephew, the U.S. State Department Coordinator for Global Anti-Corruption, just concluded his visit to Bangladesh and met several high-ranking officials. During his visit to Bangladesh, the English daily newspaper Daily Star published a bombshell report revealing that Mohammed Saiful Alam, the owner of the Asalam Group and an affiliate of the current Sheikh Hasina's regime, had laundered over $1 billion and established a business empire in the abroad. Statewatch.net and OCCRP have revealed same type of type of reports on massive corruption and money laundering. During Mr. Richard Nephew's meeting with Bangladeshi Foreign Secretary, he indicated that they might consider sanction as a tool against corruption. My question is, does the United States government intend to impose new sanctions, especially on those involved in corruption and money laundering?
So as I said in response to a different question earlier about a different country, we never preview sanctions actions before they take place. Generally speaking, sanctions can be a tool to fight corruption. We have other tools as well, such as freezing assets and giving partner nations information so they can prosecute cases. And we encourage Bangladesh to root out corrupt actors operating within its borders fairly and impartially. All right, I'll do one more. Yeah, go ahead.
Sudan?
Sure.
The fighting in Sudan is only intensifying. What message do you have? What steps do you think the United States is going to take forward to stop the fighting?
So we will continue to engage with partners in the region to try to achieve a peaceful outcome. Obviously, it's a very difficult situation, but it continues to be our belief that there is no military solution to this conflict, and we will continue to pursue diplomacy, and we will continue to press for the delivery of humanitarian assistance to the people of Sudan who ultimately are suffering.
But any pressure that will be exerted on any or imposed on any of the fighting factions?
We have already imposed sanctions on a number of parties, and we won't hesitate to use those tools in the future if it's appropriate. Thank you.